So, when you basically want to understand the condition of hydrocephalus, it's again very important to get to know the basic anatomy and the physiological features of the ventricles to have a better knowledge regarding the development. And obviously, when we are studying the etiological factors, we must have a background knowledge regarding the basic anatomical features of the ventricles. So, what you basically need to know over here, giving you a comprehensive review regarding the ventricles, we must know that ventricles are basically the fluid filled spaces that are present inside the brain. We must remember that we have a lateral ventricle. As you can even appreciate over here, this is a complete lateral ventricle. And we have basically an anterior horn, we have a posterior horn, and we have a lateral horn, which is residing in the temporal lobe of the brain. So all of these horns are basically the three major parts of the ventricles, and they are basically part of the lateral ventricle. And lateral ventricles are basically the paired ventricles. We have one of the ventricle which is situated in the right cerebral hemisphere, and then we have the left cerebral hemisphere lateral ventricle. So this is the only ventricle which is present in the paired form in the brain. Now, this lateral ventricle is basically communicating with this particular third ventricle. It's not present in a paired form. It's a single ventricle that is present in the midline. And this particular third ventricle is communicating with the lateral ventricle through an opening which is known as the foramen of Monro. Now, this opening is present over here. This is the exact location of the opening which is present between the lateral ventricles and the third ventricle, known as the foramen of Monro. So this is one of the openings. Then the third ventricle is communicating with the fourth ventricle. Here is the fourth ventricle that is lying over here, and this is communicating with the third and the fourth ventricles are being communicated by the aqueduct of Sylvius. So for now, we know that we have the third ventricle and we have the lateral ventricle, which is the largest ventricle. It has three major horns, the anterior, the posterior, and the lateral. And it is basically in a paired form. The cerebrospinal fluid is basically produced or formed in the lateral ventricles, and it is formed in the third ventricle. So the formation of the CSF is taking place mainly and majorly in the lateral and in the third ventricle. Now, as for the production of the cerebrospinal fluid, you have to remember that the ependymal cells, which are basically lining these ventricles, are responsible for the formation of the CSF. And basically, a carbolic anhydrase is basically the enzyme that is responsible for the formation of the CSF. So if you want to stop the production of the CSF over here, it can be one of the ways that we start giving acetazolamide, which is basically going to inhibit carbonic anhydrase and is going to stop the production of the CSF over here. So it's one of the mechanisms that you can remember. Now, again, we know that the cerebral hemispheres are occupying these lateral ventricles. We have identified that, and obviously these ventricles are a part of the skull. They are located in the anterior, the middle, the posterior cranial fossas. All of them are occupied by these ventricles. And we have identified the major ventricles being the lateral, the third, and the fourth ventricle. The third and the fourth ventricle is being communicated by the aqueduct of Sylvius. And over here, you have to remember that the fourth ventricle, from the fourth ventricle, the CSF passes on to the subarachnoid space. And this happens through two openings. Basically, we have a foramen of Magendie, and then we have foramen of Luschka. Now, when you want to remember, basically M stands for midline. So the foramen of Magendie is going to be present in the midline over here. And these foramenas, they are present bilaterally, and L stands for lateral. And you can basically mimic it out that it's basically the foramen of Luschka that are present laterally, and they are communicating to the subarachnoid space from here on. Now, after the the CSF enters the subarachnoid space and is basically traveling in the subarachnoid space and is basically occupying this whole subarachnoid space and is covering the whole of the brain as well as it is moving in the and covering the cerebrospinal fluid, the spinal cord as well. So the spinal cord and the brain, all of them are basically covered up by the CSF and is basically continuously circulating in the subarachnoid space. Now, does the absorption of the CSF takes place? Now, from here on, what happens is that after it gets circulated, it is going to enter into the superior sagittal sinus, and from the superior sagittal sinus, the arachnoid granulations are going to enter, and the absorption of the CSF is going to be taken place from these arachnoid granulations in the superior sagittal sinus. So this is the whole pathway. The production starts off from the lateral and the third ventricle, and the absorption, it takes place in the superior sagittal sinus over here. So you have to remember all of this. If there is any kind of a disruption that can take place in the absorption or either in the production, or it can even happen that the communication of these ventricles, this one and this aqueduct of Sylvius, or either the foramen of Magenta or foramen of Luschka, there is some sort of a disruption in this communication. It can give rise to a back pressure, and obviously the condition of hydrocephalus can arise in the individuals.